Hi everybody. Hi everybody. Okay, so let's get started on today's topic about Office 365 development. So my name is Ashish and I'm a Microsoft MVP for Office development. And you can reach me on my Twitter handle underscore Ashish Trivedi if you have any questions. So for the today's talk, I'm going to talk about the basics of Office 365 development. Um, So I'm going to focus first as what is Office 365 development or Office development. We keep hearing these terms interchanging, and rather than we are talking about SharePoint development or Office development individually as VSTO. So first we will clarify what is Office 365 development. Then I'm going to jump about as in my project. Out of these Office 365 development components, which fits in a lot of time we have a question as we have to develop SharePoint app or we have to develop Office app or we have to develop custom app. So I'm going to quickly talk about the ideas or questions which you can ask yourself or a customer, and that can help you to define and design the application which is best fit in your model. I will give you a set of questions so that you can decide as how and what application model fits in. Then I'm going to show you some demos. I'm not going to run through end-to-end demos on very specifically about SharePoint agents deployment or apps deployment or Office apps deployment. I'm going to show you quickly as in Visual Studio 2017, which has been live last week, how we can use the new projects and build the components. And then we are open for Q&A. So if you jump on the live session, you will see a window below this video where you can sign in using your Gmail and post questions. And we will take the questions at the end of the talk. Or if you have any question at any time, you can just put in your question in the window and then we can look at the end. Okay, so talking about the Office 365 development in general, I can define in today's word there are SharePoint add-ins, Office add-ins, and Office 365 applications. Now, SharePoint add-ins are very specific to SharePoint. Office add-ins are very specific to Office. When I say Office, I'm talking about the Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or Outlook add-ins, and OneNote as well now. But when I talk about the Office 365 applications, I don't define a product. I define the Office 365 suite here. So we're gonna see that how the applications can be built for Office 365 now, rather than targeting any individual product. So let's first look at the project scenario. So whenever you start a project, you have a lot of questions from customer that we have a requirement. We would like to build some process flow. We have a requirement. We would like to build some document management system. We have a requirement where we want to build a mobile application. Now, all these scenarios fall in different categories. Some scenario qualify for your SharePoint add-ins, some scenario qualify for your Office add-ins, and some scenario qualify for your Office 365 applications. Now they are very closely related in your development stack in Office 365. It always confuses what to select. So whenever I have a question about the app development, I ask some of the questions back to myself and customer as well. So what the questions which I ask is first, what is the purpose of application? Whether you're building a collaboration application or you're doing some integration, or you would like to decouple the integration and collaboration and use Office 365 as data and services platform. The next question is how your application or add-in is being accessed. Now, when you deploy your applications, there has to be some link, there has to be some way so that the user can reach your application and use it. So, so based on the scenario, how your application is being accessed by end user, how you register your application. Do you want to just have your application in SharePoint? You would like to make it public in your Office 365, or it has to just run in the Word? So you have to understand where you would like to register for those sort of applications. The next is about the authentication and authorizations requirements. So a lot of time in the previous years, whenever we are building an application, we have to build the authentication with either Windows-based AD system or a custom SQL-based authentication. And the inconsistency of the authentication provider made a lot of application development very less secure. So to build secure application, there is just one authentication provider now, Office 365 AD, which is Azure AD behind the scene. And you can use that for your authentication in all the three applications. So based on your authentication has to come from SharePoint with app, or has to come from user in Office 365 applications, or it has to be just a random authentication method for your Office add-ins. The very important piece here is about the deployment and distribution. As a developer, we focus only on the part where we are developing, but as a customer, the, the challenge is always where application gonna sit, how it's gonna interact with other application on the same server, how I'm gonna give this application to my end user. And if you ask yourself these questions, you will know whether you have to put application in your SharePoint, or you have to put your application in your own development stack and maybe on Azure or AWS, or you have to put your application via app stores in your phone so that you can distribute. So based on these scenarios, we're gonna uh, verify the SharePoint, Office, and Office 365 add-in applications as how they fit in the scenario. So first is very popular platform SharePoint. Uh, and SharePoint has been in the systems from 2001, and in last 15 years, it has evolved from very basic portal solutions to the very intelligent portal solutions now. So in your SharePoint add-in scenario, your data, which is in SharePoint, and your service to retrieve that data sits in the same context. So you build an add-in which is working only specifically in SharePoint. It is more about the collaboration you wanted to build between the user and the application and user to user, uh, and that's where you would like to keep the application very closely to the data and service system. Now, simple scenario, if I take like a leave application. So as a user, I go submit a request. As a manager, I see the request and I can approve and submit my request as well. So you see very specifically data and services available for users here. Now, in the SharePoint add-ins, there has to be very less or almost no integration with external systems. Uh, why I'm recommending that is because the authentication method in the app or add-in is totally different. It automatically talks to the SharePoint in the background and gets your user token and your app token and verify what actions can be permitted to this app and the user together. If you are building some third-party integrations, like in your add-in, you would like to talk to the Facebook and do a lot of stuff, you have to build a lot of integrations and a lot of cross-domain calls, and execution policies will block those requests. So the idea to build the SharePoint add-ins is to build the applications which sits in the same context. It's very easy to deploy on SharePoint, so you can take your app in a debugging mode straight on a developer side. You have published your app file, you take it to the app catalog, put it there, publish it, and go ahead from there. Anybody can consume that application. And this is available on SharePoint. So anybody who has to deal with this application or interact with this application has to log in on SharePoint and access that application. They can always look at the updates, and they can always look at the functionality and the permissions of the app, and administrator can modify those information for the app. Moving on the Office. Now, I remember the days approximately 3, 4 years back where it was only the Visual Studio tools for Office, and you have to write a lot of C sharp code, COM code, and you have to push the DLS to the client systems. And that has been always a risk scenario as you are pushing something in the client systems with full elevated privileges, and those code bases can cause any harm to the system or to the information being exchanged between those uh, functionalities. And that's where the new Office add-in model is very great because it decouples the functionality from the Office files. So your Office add-ins work like your web app, which runs in the context of an Office file, or of Outlook email, and then they interact based on the client object model scenario with the Office file in which you are. So they live and run the Office context. They You don't have to do a lot of switching between the application and your file. They work side by side. So it can be a task pane app or an in context app, and you can always see they are working together in the same window. You don't have to jump to the browser and jump back to the file. That's one of the improvement for improving end user productivity. On a deployment side, as it is a developer responsibility, because as a developer, when you build the web app, you have to define whether it has to sit on a local IIS server, whether it has to sit on an Azure server, or as I mentioned, it's a web app. So it could be any web app, maybe in a Python, and you can deal with the Office. So this is giving opportunity to non-Microsoft stack developers as well. They can come look at the productivity scenario, build applications, and it's in their language. On the distribution channel, there are some policies sometime, and you would like to control what app goes to the Office systems and what not. And you can define those policies in your group policy, and you can push it from a file share. Or if you are in an Office 365 scenario, you can always push from a app store, app catalog side, which is like a SharePoint app catalog, in the same place. And you have always seen that it has a SharePoint add-ins and Office add-ins repository. So you can push it from there as well, and you can access this via URL. And to, to work or deal with these applications or add-ins, user can always open a respective application. So if I have developed a Word add-in, I can open a Word file, and I can see my add-in coming over there, and I can work with that. Or if I have built a Outlook add-in where it works on a mail reading capabilities or mail writing capabilities, It will activate automatically as soon as I do a reading mail or a writing mail. In context, a great system to improve or boost productivity of end users. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about the Office 365. If you look at the Office 365, it has a lot of things like your Exchange, your Skype, your SharePoint, and now it's keep improving and keep adding a lot of services like groups, Teams, Yammer coming with the groups closely together, and then Power BI, Delve, and so on. CRM. There's so many services in Office 365. Now, when we talk about the Office 365 applications, what really I'm targeting, so the idea here is to give you a, a API channel, which is a Microsoft Graph API, which I will recommend, so that you can use your own preferred application model, application platform, and consume the data plus services from Office 365 using Microsoft Graph API. Graph API is still working around CRMs, but CRM got its own services. You can consume those as well. Microsoft Graph is totally taking up the Exchange, Skype, OneDrive, and SharePoint APIs now. SharePoint APIs are in beta currently, and Microsoft Graph API is a REST-based protocol. So you can always consume them from any of your application platform, whether it's a mobile device in Xamarin or your ASP.NET web app in Azure or your console application. Perfectly fine. You depend on Office 365 for authentication as well, which is nothing but behind the scene is a Azure AD. And you always define what permissions application has on a specific service. So I can define my permission can have a mail read and write permission, not doing anything with the user file. So if I try to write a code which is handling the mail attachments and saving back to the OneDrive, I cannot do that because the application will fail automatically as it doesn't have specific endpoints permissions. And there are some scenarios where you will see that you can use app only token scenario to do some jobs. And it depends on what application endpoints you're targeting in Office 365. I will cover this more about in the upcoming sessions where I will talk more specifically about how you can build Office 365 applications with MS Graph API, Microsoft Graph API. It's about building the integration when you have to go with the Office 365 application. So if I have a custom CRM system in my organization and I would like to bring the information from Office 365 with that CRM system, I can build these independent apps in between, which connects to both the systems and give me the integration capabilities, and I can write my own code. So if I have to read some information from CRM, generate an email to a specific user, I can do that as well. Or if I have to read information from emails and take those files, put it in a legal audit directory in a file server or their specific SharePoint site, I can do that. And there are a lot of capabilities has come in Office 365 like webhooks, your bots, and there are a lot of things which are automating your work. So this is going to be very interesting as how many topics we can cover in Office 365 application scenarios. Now, since you have taken up your preferred application model and you are defining your application, now it's your responsibility fully to deploy these applications in local system or Azure and distribute it. You can create a single tenant applications or multi-tenant applications. And based on that, you can define as what is the subscription model for these applications, what is the licensing and everything. So it's totally your responsibility to distribute and define this process. Now, these applications, once you enable with your Office 365 tenant, they come up in your apps, which is in your referral menu or app launcher, and you can add as an admin for everybody also. So you can make sure these apps are available from the app launcher, and globally anybody can launch these applications from any context. It doesn't matter whether they are in Exchange, our Outlook online, or they are looking at the SharePoint sites, or they are working in the planner or groups scenario. Now, in Office 365, we have talked about uh, the scenarios like SharePoint agents, Office agents, and Office 365 applications. But what is the best fit for cloud? Because if you talk to customers, whether it's a government, education, or any ICT computer industry company, or any legal firm, or any vertical, so far what I have seen, they would like to move to Office 365 as there are always advantages to move to cloud. So in terms of your learning, what you have learned so far in SharePoint and Office 365 side, your WSPs, which is a full trust code, which works perfectly on on-premises, but that's not at all possible in Office 365. You can do is still a bit of sandboxing, uh, and you can deploy those XML-based co- uh, code, but you cannot do any C# based code deployment now. Microsoft has deprecated that functionality. So if you would like to move your on-premises solutions to online, you have to literally go back and rewrite every component. But if you have done your development in add-ins cases like your SharePoint add-ins and Office add-ins, which you are working in SharePoint app catalog sites, if you have done that development, you can try and move to Office 365 very flexible because these add-ins decouple the functionality and make sure that they are working in the scenarios as on premises, they work the same way as in online. So you, if you have done an add-ins development, you could quickly move your information from on premises to online. Okay, so that's where the Office 365 application sits actually, as the external apps, or it could be a single page app as well. So based on your scenario, you could build Angular or Knockout application, or you can build a ASP.NET web application. So add-ins is still run in the SharePoint side, but these external applications like your Office 365 applications, which I'm calling, they totally sit outside the Office 365 scenario. You bring your own technology stack, you bring your security model, you can define your custom security model, and you build them like ground zero to the highest one, whatever the functionality you would like to build. If you have built your applications using the REST services and client object model with on-premises systems, they are the best fit for the cloud movement. So you can straight away move them in Azure or on-premises if you have a hybrid, and you can always move your data across the systems. And and this is the best scenario so far, what we have discussed for moving to cloud in the apps terminology. Now, I'm not considering SharePoint framework here because SharePoint framework is something called as what I see is a fourth development model. And in SharePoint framework, currently only the web parts are supported. So if you remember in SharePoint add-ins, you can create client-side web parts which runs in iframe. So there are comparisons directly with SharePoint Framework web part with those SharePoint add-ins, and that's why the SharePoint Framework web part is the best scenario at the moment for your web parts. They are not replacing the whole add-in model and the external app scenario. So SharePoint Framework, when we will talk in the upcoming scenarios, we will talk why they are better than add-ins. Cool. So let's get back to the computer system and show you some demos as how we can use Visual Studio 2017 and build these apps. So I'm not gonna do a lot of programming. I'm just gonna show you the what sort of the projects you have to select, what all the setting screens will appear, and when you hit debug, what happens with those. So let me go back to my screen. Okay, so I have installed Visual Studio 2017 Community Edition, which is free. You can install that as well. If you don't have any license, that's fine. Now, to try your Office 365, you can go to dev.office.com/dev program, and you can sign up for a 1 year free Office 365 developer tenant, which gives you one user license with all the services, and you can always work out or buy additional licenses if you need. And if you are with a Visual Studio subscriptions, which used to be MSDN subscription previously, you can always enable a Office 365 developer tenant from your MSDN Enterprise subscription or Visual Studio Enterprise subscription now. So let's look at the Visual Studio 2017. And when I jump on the more projects, I have, so as you might have seen with 2017, you can select what platform or development platform you would like to install. So I have installed Office and SharePoint. I go to the add-ins. Now here, add-ins are SharePoint add-ins and Office add-ins. So let's take a SharePoint add-in first. Let me give it a name, demo 1. Go down here. Now, if I have a URL for SharePoint Online, that's perfect. If you have a SharePoint on-premises, then you have to set up your on-premises environment for your app development. I do have a SharePoint Online ready here, so I'm gonna use that site. And as I mentioned, I will cover this detailed discussion about the SharePoint hosted and provider hosted in the next talk. So there are differences between the model as how they are hosted. So I'm going to select a SharePoint hosted model, go next. Now automatically it will detect whether it's a SharePoint 2013, 16 or SharePoint Online. Since I have specified SharePoint Online URL, it may pop up for a login screen, and then it will allow me to connect. Yep, here I come with a login screen. And I'm entering the password, and it connects back, and automatically it will select the SharePoint Online as the last option. If you have used on-premises based on your SharePoint, it will connect to the SharePoint 2013 or 16. It's taking a bit time here to connect to online. We have to wait for some seconds as it makes a connection. Yep, so it has selected SharePoint Online, and I do a finish. As soon as I do a finish, the project scaffolding, setting up the project structure with the required files will happen. And by the time when it happens, I will show you my SharePoint Online scenario. So I already have a developer site here, which is in SharePoint Online. And I'm going to start debugging straight so that I can see the deployment happening on the Office 365 SharePoint Online site, and then how it asks for me the permissions and things. So this is a very basic project. I'm not doing much of the work. So let's wait for the project creation and the page refresh together. It's taking a bit time here. Let's wait for the process to complete. And let me check in the meantime about the Office 365. So it's taking still load time. Let try. Yep, it's loading. Great. So this is loading perfectly. Let's check in the meantime. Oh, project is still getting created. It's taking more than a usual time. Maybe first time I'm creating it. So, like previously, you used to see the recent projects. Now, what you see is a recent template. So this is something new in the Visual Studio 2017, as you can select the template which you have recently used to create some more projects again. So that's a quick start on the project side. We have to wait here. A bit boring scenario. Checking something more. Let me see if I can open up another Visual Studio window. Okay, let's fine. Let it load in the background. I'm gonna in meantime in the show you uh, Excel web add-in. What it means like web add-in. As I mentioned, now the Office add-ins as well sit as a web app and they interact with the file type which you have attached to them. So your Excel web add-in can read write using the JS APIs, your cell table and your charts, while as the Word can read your paragraph, sections, fonts, styling, and everything, while your Outlook web add-in can read your mail read, write scenario. I'm going to give it name as Excel Demo 1. Now, if you see here, it says new functionalities to Excel or insert content into a spreadsheet. So based on the functionality, what you are looking to do, you can define and decide. So I would like to just do a insert content and do a next. Now I would like to just do a basic add-in. Let's see. And it looks like the project is ready. Okay, let's switch to offline and then put it online. That's not a problem. So if I look at this, this went offline even though the site was online. So let's put it online. And if you see here, I'm going to do a start. So if I see I have a website still loading, it's taking user time. Let me just copy this and refresh it again. And when I go to the debug, I'm not sure if it's launching the IE or it's going to launch the Chrome. Our other IDE is also ready. Let's wait for this. Let's see what it launches, IE or Chrome. It's building deploy strategy. So you can see the window down here, what's happening. And you have a button down here to add it to source control if you have systems. So now it's installing SharePoint add-in. If you can see the bottom left section of the Visual Studio. Let's wait for the installation. And then we will jump on Excel add-in. Or I can always publish the app and take the app file, go to the app catalog and deploy it from there as well. So what debug does for you to go step-by-step process and see how the code is working. And you can always debug if you are getting error in your app. So and you always deploy the app on the installation time, and then when you stop the debugging, it always redirect the app back. So you can be sure that the app only goes to the developer side, doesn't go to the production tenants. So you have to just build the app, test it on the developer side, make sure everything works fine, come back, publish the app file, and then take it to the app catalog file. While it is doing, let's see if I can run the Excel again. Both are working together. That's huge. So let's see the Excel again. So if I run it, it is gonna open and launch Excel for me. And this is happening quickly because I can always launch Excel in a local system rather than deploying or running something in the web browser. Now it says this is automatically started. It's a data visualization section where I will insert and read the information. This is a basic web part, the basic add-in. Uh, if you see here, it says example will read the current document selection, get data from selection. So if I type here, okay, so it's going to the Office 365 now. I'm gonna leave it here. I'm just confusing everybody. Okay, so this is your app project. I will come back to this. Let's first look at the Excel app. So if I go back here and type the name, and do a get data. Now it automatically selects what's the text here. And if I change it to any value, it is going to read that as well. So as you see, the Excel web add-in is running like a web app, but it's running in the Excel. So you might have heard the Excel add-in supported also in the web. So if you're gonna run this in a web Excel uh, online mode, it's gonna run there as well. And as I remember correctly, Mac has also started supporting add-ins. And as last time when I did an upgrade of my Outlook app in iOS, it said it is supporting add-ins as well for Outlook. So if you are building add-ins for Office now in the web app model like this, you can pretty much run on them desktop, browser, mobiles now slowly. So I'm not sure on the Android, but iOS supports the add-in. That's what it said to me when I upgraded the app. So it is like you take your add-ins with you wherever you are working, and they are responsive in nature because they work like a web app along with the Office. And I will talk about more in detail as what type of add-ins, how you interact with the selections, the APIs, and call in the upcoming sessions. But this is a very simple add-in as how you can see, and you can see the code behind. So if you would like to do something similar, you can start using these sample codes straight away. I will be sharing some resources where you can find samples loaded from Office add-ins, SharePoint add-ins, and Office 365 applications as well. Now, this is a very simple scenario. Now, let's go and close the, the Excel web add-in. And if you come back here, I will show you the project. Now, if you see this project here as a property, there are two add-ins. So one is like your SharePoint add-in, which gives you the app file, and there is a web part of it which runs in the web on a SSL URL here, and you can see that this runs like a website. So if I go and deploy this add-in on Azure, I can distribute this add-in to multiple users via Office Store, and based on the licensing model and pricing model, I can set and I can get the monetization done for the agents. And they run now on every device, so it's very flexible to just build one and do run this at all the places. I'm going to talk about more in detail later. And you take this app file from here, publish it via your group policies or define it via Outlook, sorry, SharePoint app catalog sites, and you can run it. Now coming back to the SharePoint idea. So as I have loaded over here, uh, it has come straight to the this app site. So as you know, in the SharePoint IDNs, they always run in a different context than a SharePoint context. So in SharePoint Online or on-premises scenario, you will see always a new URL being created. The URL always will vary as the domain. Sorry, let me just go back to it first. Okay, so first is the domain section here. Let me highlight that in the URL. Then you have a hyphen, then you have a GUID. This GUID always change as many times you deploy the app. So if I go and close this app now, and my app debugging will close, and then I will again deploy, this will get a new GUID in the system, because every time when the debugging is happening, it's installing the app, doing the work, then retracting the app. As soon as you remove the app, it will loses its identity number in the system. And then when you again deploy the same app, it takes a new number. So you have to make sure that when you have a app upgrade scenarios working, you have to deal with the versioning and subversioning information. I will talk about that later. .sharepoint.com, then your project name, pages slash default.spx. You could have multiple pages and you can set any page as your default page and the page will load automatically. Along with that, it passes some of the parameters like your host URL, then your language, ENUS, then your client tag ID, then your product number is 16, which means it is SharePoint 16 at the moment, then your app web URL. So using these parameters in your web app scenario, if I show you here in the SharePoint app, so you have your pages here, and then you have your app.js script here, which is working and showing you the name of the user. So if you see on the page back, hello admin. So as I log in, I see my name and it brings. So now in this SharePoint hosted add-in, everything is done in the JavaScript, and you can use the parameters being passed in the URL to define as what you would like to do. So if you have a list created in your app web URL, you can use CSOM to access that access the list which is in the app web using the app host URL from the parameters being passed. If you have a list in your host web, which is where the app is deployed, you can use the parameter URL to build that context and talk about that. Now, in this case, SharePoint URL is different than a SharePoint site URL. So you always use a cross-domain call using SP request executor to deal with that cross-domain calling. And you can define based on your other JavaScript framework whether you would like to build a single page app in this itself, or you would like to do jQuery based apps, use REST services, or use JavaScript object model for SharePoint. So based on your preference, you can do that. Not a problem. Now, coming back to the options. So we saw SharePoint and Office web agents. Now in the SharePoint, the other one is a provider hosted agents, which I would like to store for the next talk, where I will talk about as how the provider hosted agent differs with the SharePoint hosted agents, how the authentication flow works, and how you can deploy those provider hosted agents web section or the web pages to a Azure location and the rest in the SharePoint Online. So I will store that for the moment. Now let's go back to the presentation. Okay, I hope you will have some questions. I'm trying to keep it simple because we are just starting as a first talk today, and we'll go deeper again on the next couple of the talks where I will talk about how the authentication model and everything works. I would like to just give you an idea about what we gonna cover up in the upcoming talk. Now, what's next? So we saw like there are SharePoint agents, there are Office agents, there are Office 365 applications. Now, we saw in the Visual Studio 2017, we have SharePoint agents and then individual Office web agents model. Now, in this case, we're gonna first talk about the SharePoint agents, which is in the next month. We're gonna talk about both the agent hosting as a SharePoint hosted model and a provider hosted model. And then we're gonna talk about why they differ, how they differ, authentication flow, and everything. The then subsequent months, we're gonna talk about the Office agents. Individually, I'm gonna show you for mail, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, the web basic agents, and then we will take a scenario as when you are typing a mail or reading a mail, how the agent behaves in that scenario. After that, rather than jumping to the Office 365 application, I would like to talk about the SharePoint framework as why it is here in the Office 365 and what's the benefit and how it differs with SharePoint agent model. A lot of confusion is still as people looking SharePoint framework as a fourth, and I still believe that. I'm not sure what the roadmap is still from Microsoft, but that look very promising and very great in terms of the functionality of what it does. After that, I will finish up the SharePoint and Office. I am going to talk about the Office 365 applications. Now, Office 365 applications are about extending Office 365. So whether it's a group connector, whether it's a chatbot, or whether it's something else using the Delve API or the group API or the planner API, we will see what sort of application we can build in your preferred development platform. I love web, so I'm going to use mostly the ASP.NET Web APIs, web apps in the system. I'm going to talk about the Graph API as well, where I'm going to talk about why it's very important and how Microsoft is defining Graph API as one of the single endpoint to talk to the Office 365, any of the project services behind the scene, and tons of the information on the Office 365 development. I will be keep talking throughout the year. Resources. So uh, now it's very tough to keep up the changes and update what's happening and know where to find out. So what I generally do is I go to the dev.office.com and /blogs. So there are two URLs. So on the blogs, you will see projects announcements on the Office 365 development. Of Office PNP team does a lot of webcasts. They push the webcast video and the presentations over there on the blog site, so you can read what's happening. And they happen mostly like once in a fortnight, so you can easily follow what's happening and what's the latest trend to do the solutions. On the blogs.office.com, you see a lot of Office 365 updates on the services, and you see what's happening on the project side, and you also see from a from a development side as well. They are every week they produce a dev podcast, and I really love listening to that. They talk about the development strategies as everybody is following across the world, and uh, suggest what to look after. And they give you a bunch of information on the resources. So if you have not looked upon using your resources, you can always jump to the podcast, look at the weekly section, and you can see a lot of reference links over there. So that's a great place. I'm happy to take up any question answers if there are any in the window. And let's we are just in time around. Let's see the question answers. There are no question answers. Okay. So I'm waiting for your questions if you have any. If no, just say no so that we are sure that okay, there are no questions. And thanks for attending with me. And this will be the video posted on the YouTube. So if you have any friends who have missed this, you can pass on the video URL to them. Okay. So it looks like we are not getting a lot of questions at the moment. I'm happy if you have questions, you can mail me over the meetup group or on the Facebook page if you have come across the Facebook page, and I'm happy to take it from there. Thanks once again, everybody, for joining, and looking forward to the next topic. Thank you.